Hi guys, I thought I would do a video on desoldering tools, and I had in mind to do some extended testing on some of these new ones that I've received, like this one and that one, but I've decided that they don't work any better than the old tools that I had, really. So it's going to be a shorter video. I'm just going to be discussing what I have here. I might try a few things to demonstrate them, but that'll be about it. So there's this thing here. These things have been around forever, at least ever since I started in electronics in the late 70s. And this thing here is just like a little vacuum pump. It's got a plunger inside and a button or a trigger, and if you push it, it will suddenly snap open, and it has a plunger in here and it draws a vacuum, and the idea is that it'll suck solder to that nozzle. So when you have a PCB like this, you can heat up one of these little solder joints, pins, and as soon as the solder is melted, you can put it on there, and then you push the button and it is supposed to slurp up the solder. Now these things work very well on PCBs like this, so single-sided, and on most cases on double-sided PCs it can also work, provided that you don't have a component that is directly connected to on the top side to a ground plane, because in that case the solder will just stay on the top. You just can't accurately suck it out. And these ones here are basically a newer idea on the same thing. As you can see, it still has a plunger in there, but it has a heated tip on it, which makes it a little bit more convenient, because now you can take the little PCB and you can just stick it on the little solder joints here, and you just push the button like that and it'll suck the solder out. It's a little bit more efficient than the one that you have to use with a soldering iron or hot air, I guess you can use it with as well. This one here is just a much larger variety of the same thing, but it doesn't have a manual plunger. It has an electric solenoid in there, and when you push the button it pushes a plunger up inside, and it'll suck the solder, which means you can push the button several times in succession, and it makes it a little bit more efficient in some ways, but you have to be careful. This thing weighs very heavily. It's got a big coil in there and stuff. Goodness, it's probably at least 500 grams, I'd say. That's a pound to those that are not used to metric. What it does, if you got a very fragile PCB where the traces are not very strongly adhered to, this thing tends to have a bit of a kickback, and quite often you might find that it'll actually pull the little trace off it'll suck that off as well as the solder. So you have to be careful with these things for that reason. This here is an old variety of a similar idea. It has a little bulb on there, which you squeeze and then you put it on the PCB, and then you release the little bulb and it'll suck the solder up. But it is much slower than the suction, rather, is not as quick as these guys are. So in some ways it may not work too good. And many years ago I actually made this thing up. It is actually a little piece of metal that I cut some grooves in, and you fill the grooves up with some solder, and when you have ICs like these guys here, you can actually put it on the you heat it up and you put it on the little legs like this, so you can heat all the legs up at the same time. And I have these little devices that you can use that are spring loaded. You can put them on top of the IC and hook them on. It can be a bit tricky, and it puts it puts pressure on it, so when you are heating it up, it'll actually pull it off for you. And you know, so I've had these things forever. And then of course, what is more modern times, we have this these vacuum suckers on the workstations, you know, the solder stations. And this thing here actually has a little trigger, and it has the a vacuum pump inside of the soldering station there, and as long as you hold the button down, it'll keep sucking. So rather than just one sharp pulse like these other ones do, you can put it on there, it goes brrr, brrr, and sometimes this works very well, but there are still instances with PCBs that have big ground planes on them, and often some of the legs of the components are connected right to the ground plane or the power plane. This one here, you can probably see it has you know, probably some sort of ground plane here. Often too they do that not just for ground, but also for if there are components that need to shed some heat. And if you try to unsolder components that have one or more legs connected to those ground planes, they can be very hard to remove, especially if it is on the top, because you have to heat them from the bottom, and then you might find that you can get the solder, it'll suck the solder from the bottom piece, but the solder will stay on the top, and you still can't get the component out. And another thing you have to be very careful with is today you have multi-layered PCBs, and even if you only got 4 layers, they tend to put a ground plane on one side, and they will put a power plane on the other side, and that there are traces inside that connect the components together. And if you try to unsolder one of these things, if there's a true hole plated component on one of those PCBs, if you try to unsolder that, and if you're not careful and you apply pressure to the component, like you might be pulling on it or something while you are heating it up, you can easily pull out the plated true hole, and if that happens, then the traces that are inside are no longer connected to that hole, and you might have ruined the whole board. So you have to be really careful with those things and use them when appropriate. So that's what I have. Of course, we have solder wick as well, which sometimes is appropriate. You've seen me use it in some of the other videos. The other videos I've done is on soldering equipment and solder and flux and hot tweezers. Components that are surface mount components, they can be removed in a different way. They're much easier to remove. You can just use some hot air or hot tweezers, or those rework stations. I've done a video on those as well. Hot air or IR rework stations, they heat up the component and then you can just lift them off. But often there are still some components on modern PCBs that have surface mount components, like electrolytic capacitors, some plugs and sockets and so on, that are still plated true, and you might have to use some of these tools in order to remove them. Most of these PCBs have unleaded solder on them, and if you watch the other video that I did on soldering, and I got a little demo there of what unleaded solder does. if if it doesn't get heated all the way through, it appears to be liquid, but it kind of goes grainy, and these suction devices will not work very well. So what I've now done is I have put some leaded solder on there. As you can see, they are much shinier than the unleaded solder joints, and maybe that'll help it. Oh yeah, that's much better. Oops, pushed the button too early. Did you see that? There was a little pin there on this IC that's not actually connected to anything, but the little pad, it came off. That's what I'm talking about. And sometimes that can happen with these things if you put too much heat on or something, and you have to be really careful. In this case, it really didn't matter because it wasn't connected, but okay, it came out. I wonder if these fairly large pins this is the electric one. You push that button here, as you can. You see what happens to that unleaded solder. It's all funny, grainy looking stuff. Um, if I was doing a repair on this board, I would replace that solder with leaded solder first. Nevertheless, we got the oops, it's still hot. We got that little connector off. All right, let's have a look if I got something on this board here that I can. Some LED on there. Sometimes you gotta use this hot thing, whittle the legs, and then they will. Yeah, see, there it is, a little LED holder. 40-year-old capacitors. So they're made by Sprague. I wonder if they're still good. I'm not sure if they were using unleaded solder 40 years ago. Actually more than 40 years ago that this thing was made. Okay, got it. So that's how that goes. This one here, let's get rid of wood. This one here came with a bag of nozzles, some larger, some smaller. You have to put the right size nozzle in there for it to have good effect. It's got to be just a little bit larger than the little legs of the component that you are trying to desolder, so that the solder can flow past the legs, you know, into the housing. Let me unplug this. Let me readjust the camera here. Okay, now in order to clean these things, this particular one here, there's a little button that you can push, and then there's a plunger in there that you can just wipe stuff off there, and whatever, you can use a little brush in there, whatever is floating around in there you can get out. Like that. That's all there is to it. And then you put it back, so it's easy to clean, which is and you don't have to clean it all that often really. Okay, she's working again. So that's for that one. Untangle that cord over there. These guys over here, there is potentially a little filter in the actual station as well, but it's not expected there should be anything in there. You have to push that little lever here, then you can pull that back, and then this comes out. I've noticed that the new ones have a clear body there, so you can see if there's anything going wrong in there, and it has this stainless steel spring that collects the solder. You can pull it apart like that, and the solder doesn't stick to it, so there's a little bit more in there. There it went. Blow some air on it, and then there's some different nozzles. I think this nozzle is a little bit small for what I was doing, and that's why it could have worked better. Let me have a look here. This is some stuff that came with that solar station. I think, yes, here's another nozzle, but this one looks even smaller. There's not a bigger one that came with it. Alright. I knew there was another nozzle, but I didn't know how big it was. Okay. I had this thing for maybe 4 years, and I've only used this desoldering tool very few times. I tend to use these other ones because I'm too lazy to clean it out. There's also a wad of stuff in there. A little rubber seal. I guess that goes against there. I'm wondering if that was in right. Maybe that's why it wasn't sucking very well. So that's pretty much it to do with the desoldering tools here. Yeah, I think that's all we got. So until next time.